He started digging on a bright Monday morning, the kind where the air smells of cut grass and coffee steam. By 9 o'clock, the first concrete blocks rose on my side of the line, 6 feet inside my land. I stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching shadows creep where they didn't belong. June 14th, 2023. At exactly 8:42 a.m., a yellow backhoe rolled past my mailbox. The engine groaned, the ground shook, and with every scoop of dirt, my quiet freedom shrank. Here, boundaries are more than lines on a map. They're memories, promises, and time measured in seasons. He waved like we were still friends. Then he planted fresh stakes, confident as a man holding the winning hand. He even said the survey matched. That's when I almost smiled. 20 years ago, after a storm toppled half the fence, I replaced every boundary marker myself. Not with the originals. Those I locked in a metal box alongside the deed, my father's fountain pen, and a folded county map. A quiet habit, a patient plan. Why wait? Because some truths ripen. Because a man who takes an inch will take a mile if you push too soon. And because time, if you let it, will hand you the perfect moment. You'll see it at 12 minutes, 18 seconds when his papers land on the table and the room finds out which markers were real. I've lived on this patch of land for 41 years. Bought it when my hair was still black, when my knees could take the ladder in one go. 4 acres of rolling grass, a stand of maples along the east side, and a weathered barn that smells of hay and rain. Every morning I walk the fence line with Duke, my old hound. He's slow now, but his nose still finds the same spots it did when he was a pup. The markers, those little iron posts sunk in concrete, have been there longer than Duke. I know each one by heart. My father taught me that boundaries aren't just for property. They're for peace. When you respect them, you sleep well. Out here, time moves differently. You hear the seasons before you see them. The rustle of spring leaves, the snap of winter ice under boot. Folks mind their own, and a man's word still means something, or so I thought. That Monday began like any other. Coffee on the porch, local news murmuring from the kitchen, sunlight spilling over the barn roof. I remember thinking how quiet it was, even for June. Then Duke's ears twitched. He gave a low rumble, the kind that says something's not right. Through the trees, I caught the glint of metal. Not the silver of my fence wire, but yellow paint, construction yellow. Moving slow and heavy. The kind of machine you only bring when you mean to change the ground itself. By the time I reached the edge of my property, the engine's growl had replaced the morning birds. And that's when I saw him, my neighbor, standing with his hands on his hips, surveying a spot I knew wasn't his. I didn't say a word, not yet. Some things are better measured in minutes and inches before you decide the next move. He noticed me before I spoke, but he didn't flinch. Just tipped his cap like we were meeting at the feed store. "Morning," he called over the rumble of the backhoe. I looked past him to the fresh line of stakes. Bright orange flags fluttered in the breeze, each one stabbed into ground that had been mine since 1982. They weren't random. They marched in a straight line, only the line was wrong. "Survey came back last week," he said, stepping closer. "Turns out the old markers were off a bit." He grinned like it was good news for both of us. Off a bit. That's what he called 6 feet deep into my field. My father used to say, "A man's smile can be a fence or a gate. You just have to know which one you're looking at." I knelt near one of the new stakes, pressing my hand into the soil. Fresh cut, no sign of age. And no trace of the original marker that should have been here. "Who did your survey?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Friend of mine from the city, knows his stuff." I nodded, but inside, the gears turned. City surveyor, no record in the county office yet, and not a word to me until the machines rolled in. That wasn't neighborly ignorance, that was a plan. Duke padded up beside me, tail still, ears high. He didn't bark. He didn't have to. The morning sun felt hotter than it should, the way it does when something's about to shift. I stood, brushed the dirt from my palm, and met his eyes. "Interesting?" I said. "I'll take a look at that." I walked back toward the house without another word, each step measured, the kind you take when you're counting more than distance. By mid-afternoon, the backhoe had carved a trench along his new boundary. I stayed inside, letting the curtains shield my view. Sometimes you learn more by not interrupting the noise. Around 4, the hum stopped. A knock rattled my front door, 3 quick taps, then 1 long. I opened it to find him there, dust on his jeans, clipboard in hand. "Thought you'd want a copy," he said, holding out a thin stack of papers. Survey maps printed in black and green with his name neatly underlined. I scanned the top sheet. The lines were bold, the kind a man wants you to notice, but the legend, the small print, was missing the county stamp. Without it, the drawing was nothing but ink. "You sure about this?" I asked, tapping the corner. "Absolutely, my guy's been doing this for 20 years. Said the old markers didn't match his measurements. We're just correcting history." Correcting history. I let the phrase settle. People only use that kind of language when they think they're writing the final version. "Mind if I keep this?" I asked. "Go right ahead." He smiled again, too easily. "I'll be pouring footings by Thursday." I watched him walk back toward the trench, his stride quick, almost eager. A man in a hurry to claim what isn't his often trips before the finish line. Inside, I laid the papers on the kitchen table next to my father's old ledger. I didn't open the metal box in the closet. Not yet. Timing is everything. I called the county clerk, asked about any recent filings. She said nothing had come through on our section in over a year. That was the first red thread in his sweater. Outside, the backhoe coughed to life again. This time, the sound felt different, more like a countdown than construction. And somewhere between the engine's roar and the rattle of stone, I knew. This wasn't about confusion. It was about taking without asking. That evening, I drove into town under the cover of dusk. The clerk's office was closed, but the surveyor's firm, if it existed, should have had a listing. I sat in the truck with the dome light on, flipping through the yellowed business directory I kept behind the seat. No match. His friend from the city was a ghost. Back home, I pulled the county plat book from the shelf. The maps were dated but official, stamped in red. Every marker position matched the originals I had stored in that metal box. I traced the boundary line with my finger, feeling the weight of decades in every inch. Nothing about it was off a bit. The next morning, I caught sight of him talking to a man in a pressed shirt and shiny boots, too clean for construction. They spoke in short bursts, heads bent close. A folder passed from one hand to the other. When they left, I walked the trench. Fresh concrete forms stood like sentries, each one anchored to those new stakes. This wasn't guesswork. It was an investment, a risk he thought was worth taking. In the barn loft, I found the old cedar box my father had built. Inside, under folded maps and brittle photographs, lay the original boundary markers, iron caps etched with county numbers still flecked with the soil of the year we set them. Proof carved in metal. Holding one in my palm, I remembered my father's voice. "Never rush a fence fight. Let the other man build his case on sand." Through the open loft window, I could see the wall taking shape, and in that moment I understood. He wasn't just trying to steal land. He was betting I didn't have the will or the evidence to stop him. He was about to learn just how long I'd been willing to wait. The third morning, I brewed my coffee stronger. The air carried that damp heaviness before a summer storm, and with it, a sense that the ground under this fight was shifting. I sat at the kitchen table with 3 things in front of me: the county plat book, the photocopy of his survey, and one of the original markers. Side by side, the truth and the lie looked almost polite until you measured the distance between them. I thought about all the ways I could go at this. Call the sheriff, hire a lawyer, raise my voice. But men who rush in swinging often find themselves out of breath before the real fight begins. No, this would take something quieter, sharper. I called an old friend, Paul Jensen, retired county surveyor. We'd hunted together for years, and he knew this land as well as I did. When I told him what was happening, he didn't ask why I'd waited. He just said, "Bring the originals, meet me at the courthouse tomorrow." After hanging up, I walked the fence line one more time. Duke trailed behind, sniffing the grass like it was just another morning. To him, the world hadn't changed. But I could feel the weight of every inch the neighbor had tried to claim, pressing in on the edges of my patience. As I passed the barn, I ran my hand along the rough boards, thinking of my father setting these boundaries with nothing but a tape measure, a level, and his word. Those lines weren't just legal. They were personal. By sunset, the decision was made. I wouldn't shout and I wouldn't warn him. I'd let him pour every inch of concrete he could afford, stack his case brick by brick, until the day he found out the foundation was never his. That was the only way this would mean something. The next morning, I was on the road before sunrise. The courthouse sat quiet in the pale light, its stone steps slick from an overnight drizzle. Paul was already there, leaning on his cane, a leather satchel at his feet. We spread everything out on a long oak table in the records room. The original markers, the stamped plat maps, my deed, even the yellowed photographs from the year the fence went in. Paul examined each piece like a jeweler weighing gold. "This is ironclad," he said, tapping the metal caps with a finger. "No judge will question these, but we'll need an official resurvey to seal it." By noon, he'd arranged it. A county-certified crew would mark every corner of my property by Friday. Quiet, thorough, and documented with a fresh stamp. I left the courthouse with a folder thicker than it had been in 20 years. On the way home, I stopped by the bank, pulled a small sum from my savings, enough to cover legal filings and a retainer for an attorney I trusted. No one noticed, just another old man taking care of his affairs. Back at the farm, the neighbor's crew was in full swing. Rebar cages stood like a row of metal skeletons. He spotted me from across the field and raised a hand. I gave a nod but didn't cross the line. Not yet. That evening I called the attorney. Gave him every detail, every date, every photograph. He listened without interrupting, then said the words I'd been waiting for. Let him finish. The more he builds, the more it costs him to undo. Outside, the wind picked up. Clouds gathered over the maples, dark and slow-moving. The storm wasn't here yet, but it was close. I closed the barn door, slid the bolt, and knew the first move had been made. Friday came with a clear sky, the kind that fools you into thinking the day will stay calm. By mid-morning, the county crew rolled in. White trucks, laser tripods, steel measuring rods. They worked with quiet precision, moving from marker to marker, some buried so deep it took a pick to reach them. The neighbor wandered over, a frown replacing his usual smile. "What's going on here?" he asked, hands in his pockets like he owned the place. "County resurvey," Paul said without looking up. "Standard procedure when there's a dispute." "Dispute? We've already settled this. My survey—" Paul straightened, his voice even. "Your survey isn't in the county record." He pointed toward one of the unearthed markers, its iron cap catching the sun. "This one is." The neighbor's jaw tightened. "I don't know what game you're playing, but—" I stepped forward, cutting him off. "No game, just facts. You've been building on the wrong side." For a moment, he seemed to weigh his next move. Then he forced a chuckle like the whole thing was some harmless mix-up. "Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'll talk to my guy." "Do that," I said, keeping my tone flat. As he walked away, I caught something in his posture, a stiffness, a pause before each step. Not fear, not yet, but the first edge of doubt. That afternoon, his crew packed up early. The backhoe sat silent, bucket lowered to the ground. From my porch, I watched him make a phone call, pacing in tight circles. By sunset, the site was empty. For the first time all week, the field was quiet again. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Men who think they're entitled don't surrender after one bad day. They regroup, and when they come back, they come harder. The real test was still ahead. He came back the following Tuesday, just after lunch. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 men in suits trailed behind him, their polished shoes sinking into the soft earth. One carried a briefcase, the other a clipboard. They moved with the air of people who believed a signature could bend reality. "We're here to settle this," the neighbor announced, stopping just shy of the original fence line. "I've got the paperwork. All we need is your agreement, and this can be done without court." I motioned toward the porch table where Paul sat waiting with the county crew chief. The men in suits laid out their documents, pages fanning across the wood. They spoke of adjusted boundaries, historical inaccuracies, and amicable resolutions. I let them finish. Then I reached under the table and placed my own folder beside theirs. Inside, certified plats, stamped photographs, notarized affidavits from Paul, and the original markers themselves, cold, heavy, undeniable. The county crew chief slid the official resurvey across the table. The red stamp glared up like a seal of finality. "These are the recorded boundaries," he said. "They match the markers on site. There's no discrepancy." One of the suits shifted uncomfortably. The neighbor leaned over the papers, scanning faster now, his smile gone. "This isn't." "It is," I said quietly. "Every inch you've built beyond that line belongs to me. Every footing, every wall, every block." The wind picked up, scattering a few loose sheets into the grass. No one moved to catch them. His eyes flicked to his men, then back to me. "We can work something out," he muttered. "We already have," I replied. For a long moment no one spoke. Then the county chief gathered the documents into a neat stack, tapped them twice, and handed them to me. The papers in their briefcase, worthless now. And they knew it. By the next morning, their crew was gone. The backhoe, the stacks of cinder blocks, the pallets of rebar, vanished as if the week before had been a bad dream. The trench lay half-filled, water pooling in the low spots from last night's rain. I walked the line slowly, Duke padding beside me. The air felt lighter, the kind of stillness that comes when a storm finally breaks. Each original marker was back in place, gleaming faintly under the soft sun, their tops still damp from where the county crew had reset them. My attorney called just before noon. "They've withdrawn any claim," he said. "Filed it this morning. You're clear." Clear. The word carried a weight I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For weeks, maybe months, I'd lived under the quiet press of someone else's intent, the shadow of their walls stretching over my ground. Now, the light was mine again. I spent the afternoon in the barn, sorting through tools, letting the rhythm of work settle me. Hammer on wood, the creak of floorboards, the smell of dust and oil. It all reminded me why this place mattered. Land isn't just soil, it's the record of every step you've taken on it. Every fence post you've set, every morning you've stood on the porch and known you were home. From the loft window, I could see the neighbor's yard, empty, except for a single roll of caution tape fluttering in the breeze. He hadn't been outside all day. By sunset, Duke and I took one last walk along the fence. The markers were exactly where they'd always been. The only difference was the quiet knowledge that I'd been ready, long before he ever decided to test the line. And I had no doubt he now understood that too. 2 days later, a flatbed truck pulled into his driveway. From my porch, I watched as laborers loaded pallet after pallet of unused materials, cement bags, bricks, rebar, back onto the truck. No one spoke much. The sound was just the scrape of metal, the thud of heavy loads, and the occasional clank of chains tightening. By mid-morning, a county code inspector arrived. Clipboard in hand, he walked the perimeter of the half-built wall, snapping photos, jotting notes. The neighbor followed him like a shadow, head bent, arms crossed. Every now and then I caught a gesture, sharp, frustrated, like he was trying to bargain with reality. I knew better than to gloat, but there was a certain quiet satisfaction in seeing the process unfold. Each block of that wall represented time, money, and confidence he could never get back. That afternoon, I learned from Paul that the county would be issuing a removal order. Everything he'd built past the true boundary would have to come down, at his expense. No reimbursement, no exception. The next morning, I spotted him out there alone, pulling up the new stakes one by one. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if each one weighed more than it should. For the first time since this began, he glanced over and didn't force a smile. He just nodded once, a brief acknowledgement, then went back to his work. By week's end, the trench was filled, the ground leveled, grass seeds scattered over the bare earth, a thin green promise that by next spring there'd be no sign of the fight, at least not on the land itself. But some boundaries don't fade. They stay sharp in the mind, measured not in feet or inches, but in the memory of the day someone tried to take what was yours and failed. The field looked whole again by the first week of September. Morning light spilled over the grass like it had before, no shadows from concrete walls, no flags fluttering where they didn't belong. Just open space, still and familiar. I stood at the porch rail, coffee in hand, feeling the kind of quiet that doesn't just happen. It's earned. Every step in this fight had been deliberate. Every day a choice to let patience work harder than anger. It reminded me of my father's way, how he could sit through a storm without flinching, knowing some things settle themselves if you give them time. The neighbor kept his distance. We'd pass each other on the county road now and then, a short nod replacing the easy waves we used to share. I didn't need an apology, and I doubted I'd get one. The truth was enough. Paul came by one evening with 2 cold beers. We sat on the porch, Duke sprawled at our feet, watching the sun sink behind the maples. "You played it right," Paul said. "Didn't give him anything to twist. Let him walk right into the proof." I thought about the markers in the cedar box upstairs, the ones that had waited 20 years for their purpose. Proof isn't just about winning. It's about knowing you can stand on your ground without leaning on anyone else's word. Before he left, Paul asked if I'd ever sell the place. I shook my head. This land is more than dirt and grass. It's the measure of time I've lived and the freedom I've kept. Somewhere out there, someone will try again. Maybe not here, maybe not in my lifetime. But I know this much. Patience is a fence no one sees until they run into it. If you've ever had to defend what's yours, your land, your home, your peace, you understand. It's not about how loud you speak, it's about how long you're willing to stand, and sometimes the best revenge is letting them see what they can't take.